We are live on Secrets of Success podcast, episode number 6 with Dr. Shane Needham. That is me, where our theme is never be outworked. I am so excited for today. We have lots of callers. We're going to have some callers that are calling in, and there's actually a number you can call. Go to my Facebook Live. You can see that number there. Go to my Facebook. You can see that number there. And you can also call in, and we will get you directly into our queue. So it's going to be first come, first serve with callers today, and you can start calling after about 10 a.m. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the podcast. We are a voice of science, we're a voice of business, and we're a voice of maybe people that don't always have a voice. And today we're going to give a voice to America, about those citizens that may be in rural America, like we're in Idaho. My guest is Joel Sherer. We'll talk about him in a minute. He's also in Idaho. And we're going to be talking about them and talking about COVID-19 and our rights. What are our rights in the United States of America? I know a lot of us are worried about those things. And so Joel's going to be talking about those things. So first of all, let me give you a little bit of an introduction. Again, our theme is never be outworked. Follow me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on LinkedIn. Follow my YouTube. Visit my website. We just started to roll that out at drsneedham.com. Thank you so much. We've had so many people sign up for that this week. Thank you very, very much. We really, really appreciate it. And so since we're going to take callers today, we're not going to talk as much with about necessarily our stories and some other things. We're going to be just on the fly, taking calls on the fly with some introductions and not necessarily our totally regular format. And we're just going to see how it goes. And so first of all, I have Joel Sherer, who not only is an attorney who's barred in Idaho and California, which is, by the way, amazing. He passed the bar in California the first time, which not very many people do that, by the way. Good job, Joel. I also get to call him an awesome friend. And so thank you, Joel, for being on our show. He's in Idaho. As you can see, he's actually in his home. And if you look close enough, you can see the elk antler chandelier hanging behind him. Is that right? Is that what that is, Joel?
I think it's just deer, but yeah.
Okay.
It's an antler chandelier.
All right. Awesome. So, Joel, why don't you quickly catch us up to speed a little bit on what, first of all, how we met. Just maybe we'll spend a couple of minutes there, how we met, what you remember, and then I'll talk about that as well.
I went to law school up in Moscow, where you're located. Awesome show, by the way. I'm super excited to be a part of it. But I was going to law school up there, and I grew up wrestling. I've got to always promote wrestling wherever I am. Wrestling has what given me the best friends that I could ever ask for. But I knew you through wrestling just because you were running the Moscow Wrestling Club at the time, and you were doing such an amazing job about it. I mean, it was kind of everywhere. I think it was the largest youth sport at the time in Moscow. I think it was beating out little kids soccer.
It was at that time.
And you were doing running that whole thing, and I can't go anywhere without wanting to coach or be a part of the wrestling scene, no matter where I am, and got a hold of you. I think I got a hold of you because we needed a place to practice for the University of Idaho's team. I knew you had a facility, and got a hold of you that way, and you hired me on as a club coach, and together we made some pretty good wrestlers. Your oldest son was a 4-time state placer, I think, for Moscow High School, and a state finalist as a junior.
Yeah, you were a big part of that, including showing him how to beat the guy in the semifinals that he met at districts and couldn't beat, but he beat him at state in the semifinals, and that was huge for his junior year. And so I always thank you for that. And so obviously Joel and I are connected through wrestling, and obviously that's a never be outworked mindset, and that's what Joel certainly has as well. And so let's get going with the show. So Joel is very well studied in the Constitution. I actually like the Constitution. I'm a constitutional guy. I love the liberties that we have in the United States. I really like that we do have a Constitution that are unalienable rights that give us so many things. Okay. And so we're going to be talking about that. And I can tell you this, Joel has a lot of the mindset that I do as far as maybe a patriotic, libertarian, constitutionalist, so to speak. And I'm very, very proud of that. I know he is too. He also brings up some very good legal issues that I was surprised about. And so before we start taking callers, we're going to, what I'd like to talk about is one thing that Joel brought up to me, and I want you to explain it, Joel, about the quarantine and the shutdown. Okay, so we've been quarantined, we've been self-isolated. Some of us are forced to not go to work. We can't go to work, okay? And some of those people are in restaurants and they're business owners or they're servers or they're a hairstylist or a barber. And these people can't necessarily be shut down for very long without it affecting them. And so what can the government cannot do? And so one of the things that Joel told me, and I want Joel to explain this, is he thinks the quarantine and the shutdown is constitutional, but may not be legal. Joel, can you talk about that?
Yeah. Ultimately, as you go through the governor's order, it's actually not the governor's specific order so much as it's done by the Department of Health and Welfare and the director of the Department of Health and Welfare, and gives them the authority to do that is the Idaho Code. And in the Idaho Code, it says, they can make these rules and they can execute these orders as long as they follow their own rules. So essentially, our state Congress has given the authority to do this through statute, and there's it brings in the idea of the connection between administrative law and legislative law, and kind of how those two things intertwine. I will say I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I am an attorney. I practice criminal law and I deal with the Constitution a lot. I am absolutely an enthusiast about the Constitution. I love history. I love the history of our country and some of the concepts that I grew up to know, especially growing up in the Midwest, growing up in Idaho, and these independence concepts and these things that I have these rights that can't be taken away from me, and I have the right to pretty much seek my fortune in this country.
Yeah.
And I've always seen government as almost an obstacle to that. And certainly the area of administrative law, where an administrative agency, which is under the executive branch, and we see them throughout the country, such as the EPA, Department of Homeland Security, and even in states such as the Department of Health and Welfare. So what an administrative agency can do is they do have the ability to promulgate rules under statutory authority, which is what we have here. And they simply have to follow the rules that they themselves have written, which will be implicated in a due process argument. And there's certainly an argument to be made for the due process. And there may be an issue as to not following all the rules that they themselves have written down underneath this law. The law gives them the authority to issue this order, but they do have to follow their rules, and their individual rules for instituting isolation or quarantine requires personal notice to an attending physician, things like that, and they're found under the IDAPA rules.
And you're saying that rule is in, for example, a specific state statute.
That rule is in the IDAPA rules. It's the rules for the administrative procedure.
Is that at the federal level, Joel? Is that at the federal level or the state level?
No, that's at the state level. The way these administrative agencies work is they receive congressional authority either on a federal level or on a state level. If it's a federal level, it's obviously a federal administrative agency like the EPA that works, over all the states, or it's at a state level, such as the Department of Health and Welfare that works under Idaho State. It is technically an executive branch of the government. So it's under the executive branch. They do have the ability to promulgate rules and enforce those rules, and even adjudicate their own rules. A lot of the time, they're governed at the federal level by the federal APA, which is the Administrative Procedures Act, which lays out guidelines of how they have to operate, how they have to promulgate rules, how their adjudications work. And adjudication through administrative procedure or administrative agency works a lot the same as a court sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. Again, these rules are laid out in the APA, but states also have APAs.
So basically what you're saying is the federal government gives the administration like executive powers to make these administrative agencies, and then they can give them to the states. So that's how it makes it constitutional, correct?
Not quite.
Okay.
If it's a federal administrative agency, Congress, United States Congress the legislature has to give them authority.
Okay.
If it's a state agency, such as the Department of Health and Welfare in Idaho, the Idaho legislature has to give them the authority.
So to wrap this part of it up, one of the things that you said to me, offline a few days ago, which was just, I thought, fascinating, and it's educating me, and I appreciate this, Joel, is it may be constitutional, but it's not necessarily legal. And are you saying because the state statutes require doctor's orders for quarantine of each individual and so on and so forth? Is that kind of what you're saying, why it might not be legal? So it takes away our...
They violated
So it violates, take that. Okay, we are getting our first call.
Yeah, it violates the statute.
Okay, so we are getting our first call. They're going to be online. So it violates that due process, is what you're saying, that individual right of due process. And so let's get into that. But we have our first caller on the line. I think we have, let's see, who do we have? Okay, we have Gabe from Idaho. Gabe, can you hear us?
I sure can.
Excellent.
Thanks for taking my call.
Hey, thanks for calling in, Gabe. And so we have, as you know, Attorney Joel Sherer on the line. We're talking about the quarantine, and it may be constitutional, but is it legal? And I want all callers to know, and everybody to know, we're all in different camps here, but we're really on the same boat. Okay, we're in the same boat. And so those that are afraid that government's taking too much power away from us, I understand that. Those that are afraid of COVID-19, I understand that too. Those who are afraid of the economic destruction, I am deathly afraid of that. I have a family to support as well. And so Gabe, what is your question for Joel?
Yeah, thanks, James, for taking my call, Joel. In Idaho, we have, the governor, it sounds like you've already been discussing kind of general principles behind this, but the governor has been basing his, decision, his resolution based off our health and welfare code. But particularly in section 56-101-001, it defines what isolation is and what the legal definition of quarantine is. And both those isolation and quarantine definitions under the resolution that Brad Little is using to shut down the state, he's kind of flipped it upside down, meaning that isolation in the state of Idaho, as defined by the statute, means the separation of infected persons or of persons suspected to be infected from other persons to such places under such conditions and for such a time as will prevent transmission of the infected agent. That's the definition of isolation. I'll just repeat the core of it. It's for a person suspected of infection or infected. Secondly, the definition of quarantine means the restriction placed on the entrance to and exit from the place or premise where an infectious agent or hazardous material exists. So basically, Brad Little flipped the definition of isolation and quarantine upside down and said everyone's suspected of being infectious, so I can quarantine the whole state instead of a specific location. How do we sort through that legally? I don't know if Brad Little would listen to this argument, but it's very clear how things are being defined and then how he's applying it to the state of Idaho.
Very, very, very good question. Wow. Thank you very much, Gabe. Joel?
Gabe, thank you. That's a great question. I think for this particular disease, it's hard to nail down who's infected and who isn't. You kind of have to do the work with what you have, and this is what he has. But he hasn't. The governor had the director of the Department of Health and Welfare sign off on this, and if you go to IDAPA 16.02.10.065, it also lays out the powers of the Department of Health and Welfare to quarantine. You can also see the procedures that you have to go through. I think the fact that these procedures are also written to require individual notice and require the notice to an individual doctor, and indeed even the definitions of quarantine and isolation, they don't account for this level of quarantine and for this type of disease where, and again, I don't presume to be an expert on health or on the coronavirus or on how it spread, but I know that we are being told by several different sources that some of the majority of carriers of this are asymptomatic. And I think when you can't tell who's infected and who's not, you don't have a whole lot of options as far as what you can do. Not to defend the governor's order or say that this is entirely justified, but this is the best attempt to codify that power that has essentially been an inherent power in a government to protect its people, and to try to regulate the health of a general society.
Right, but so first of all, the asymptomatic thing, I'm fine with agreeing with you on that. And if that's the case, then death rate is going to be far less and way lower. It'd be more like the flu or H1N1 death rate. And so people are hyperbolizing a scenario. They're trying to borrow this asymptomatic problem, which is I'm very much open to believing that that's a reality of this COVID. But then that's going to also drive the death rate down significantly. So where this issue is not as big of a threat as we think it is. Secondly, I agree with you that I'm not denying that the government doesn't have responsibility and has authority to quarantine. All I'm saying is that they're quarantining outside of their own statutes. They're stretching the definition of a quarantine from a specific location to a whole state, which is definitionally, they just don't have the authority to do that, but they're doing that.
Well,
I agree with you.
Yeah, we're getting some more callers. Gabe, I stay on the line,
Yep.
Stay watching. These are great questions, and we've got another caller in line. That caller that we just missed, Dan, call in. Dan from Idaho, call back in. We're going to put you on the line. You're in the queue. Gabe, stay tuned because we're going to talk about due process and what you can do to take action for this to make sure that maybe it doesn't happen again. So stay tuned in this segment, and we will talk about this. Gabe, thanks for your call. And
thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, and Dan, you're up next. Dan. So Dan, we're waiting for Dan to call back in. We lost him briefly. If you're online, okay. Dan from Idaho. Dan from Idaho, can you hear us? Dan, can you hear us?
Hey.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. And so,
Okay.
Hey, callers, we're about 5 minutes behind schedule. These are great questions. I love this. We have lots of viewers online right now. Very, very exciting. It's a really good topic. Joel's doing an amazing job. We have Dan from Idaho too. And so, Dan, what is your question for Joel?
I have a couple questions. I'm a history teacher, so I kind of go on the basics of the Constitution. So I wanted to ask, does the Constitution allow the Supreme Court to make a law? Because Article 1 states, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States. And one of the reasons I'm asking this because, sometimes I listen to you guys talk, you and my brothers talk about law and how the Supreme Court makes a decision and then all of a sudden that is affected by law, and I understand that they interpret the law, but I think sometimes people can get confused and they think that, the Supreme Court makes laws, and in reality they interpret laws.
That's a great question, and that does cut to the heart of a lot of our separation of powers and how we work as a government. But there was a justice, one of our Supreme Court justices back in I want to say it's 1803. There was a case called Marbury versus Madison, and yeah, I understand that it's a case that establishes, the court got to say that the court gets to decide what the law is, and part of that interpretation of the law and of our Constitution it's almost a necessary aspect of our government. You look at somewhere like Canada's constitution, it's books upon books, and you look at our constitution and pages. It's pages, meaning that there are a lot of powers and there are a lot of elements that are included in the Constitution that are vaguely described but have to be applied to very specific circumstances. And the court in Marbury versus Madison, way back when, one of the foundational cases, and Dan, I know you know this, so it's a great question, though, to educate the public. The court, a justice named John Marshall, one of our greatest justices, just issued an opinion saying the court gets to decide the interpretation of the law, meaning that Congress can make a law, but the court has to decide what it means, meaning they have to interpret the law and they have to apply these laws to all kinds of different situations, from every single aspect that is protected by the Fourth Amendment of protection against unreasonable search and seizure. And I get to deal with that on practically a daily basis doing criminal law. And you also have to try to apply the Interstate Commerce Clause.
Hello?
I think we
Ultimately,
lost Joel in the screen
No, I got
briefly.
you.
He's back.
I got you.
I'm back. Ultimately, I think it's a necessary power of the Supreme Court that, yeah, they kind of can make law as a functional aspect. Now, as a legal aspect, there's always issues you have to deal with, like the non-delegation principle of the Constitution, and you have to deal with that as well with administrative agencies, because just like you said, Congress is supposed to be the one, or the legislature is supposed to be the one who makes laws.
And so Dan, it's a great question. And so kind of what Joel is saying is Supreme Court gets to decide what the law says and how it's interpreted.
Yeah.
And so, Dan, how would, it's a really good question. How does this relate to COVID-19? Because I bet you it does. So what is your question specific to maybe the quarantine and the shutdown? What are your question there?
Well, my question is just because I think that I had another question actually about the Constitution and the president, but I think that powers can be abused, and I think that's how a lot of people are feeling during this time. Is, we grant these powers, and then the legislative branch is supposed to make laws, and then the Supreme Court, they can interpret those laws, but that power can be abused. Also, the power can be abused by a president or a government. And a lot of people don't. I get this. I know it's a pretty basic question in class all the time, but even like adults talk to me. They think that the Constitution allows the president to make a law, which is false. Because again, it's all legislative powers, which which I just said, reside in Congress, right? So they legislate the laws. They make all the laws, and then the Supreme Court interprets them, and then the president enforces those laws. But one of my questions for you guys is, a governor, obviously, the constitutions from state to state differ. You talked about earlier with the last guy, a governor or a president can do this, is they're supposed to enforce the laws, and so they put people in charge, and those people make rules. Okay. So these people that are making the rules aren't rules another word for law? So isn't that against the Constitution for these people? Yeah, they're finding a loophole here, and they're saying that to enforce the laws, they're making these rules. Doesn't that seem like a big loophole?
Absolutely. And our country's history with administrative agencies and allowing this to happen goes all the way back from the very founding with the Department of the Treasury. I mean, we've had these administrative agencies that have been delegated these powers, and I don't like the administrative state. I personally have issues with it because these people are also they're not voted in, they're appointed, and it turns into a huge bureaucracy. However, Congress has essentially made the law by granting statutorily the authority to handle this issue. It's almost the same as making a task force or something like that, that you're dealing with an issue that Congress, Congress is not a doctor. Like, senators aren't doctors. You can't rely on them to be those roles. But what they're doing functionally is trying to find the most equipped people to handle these different areas of law.
That's a very good point. And
Yeah.
and Dan, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answered my question. That was a great explanation.
So Dan, we have another caller.
Okay.
I can get to it. If you can post on Facebook a question,
Okay.
I can see those live as well pretty easily. We'll try to get to that now. But Dan, stay on the line, because we're going to have Lauren in 1 minute. We have Lauren on hold. In 1 minute, we will get to you, and we want you to call back, Lauren from Idaho. But Dan, obviously you've probably seen Attorney General Barr, and he says that if the quarantine, at the federal level, if the quarantine goes on too long, he's going to side with the people against the states. And then you have people like, well, we know in Idaho, there's some actual county prosecutors that are actually telling the governor this is illegal. So there's so many different camps here, Dan. We're going to take this call, put it on Facebook. Dan, thank you for the call. Thanks for the answer, Joel.
All right, thanks.
Hello. Lauren, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, Lauren from Idaho. Welcome to the show. And what is your question for Joel?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say, obviously, thank you guys for taking my call. And an authority on the subject told me that the chandelier is actually mule deer antlers and not elk. So I wanted to clear that up.
Okay, that's good. It's a mule deer.
Hey, that's good to know.
But my question for Joel is a little bit broader. Granted, I don't have the code to reference, but obviously the governor has recommended the shutdown of all businesses that are non-essential. What I'm wondering is, where does he get the authority to shut down non-essential businesses? And more specifically, where does he get the authority to determine what businesses are essential?
Wow. Well, that is a great question, Lauren. Wow.
That is a great question. Well, in the governor's order, he does lay out his authority to do this. The governor has the authority. If you want to be able to look it up, it's Idaho Code Section 46-601 and Idaho Code Section 46-1008. Particularly, what he's used Idaho Code Section 56-1003 Subpart 7 to allow the quarantine orders through the director of the Department of Health and Welfare. And as we discussed earlier on the show, they do have to follow their own rules under IDAPA in issuing these orders and things like that. But that's where the authority is coming from.
But we don't know if the exact rules are. So they have the authority, but like we heard from the first caller, we're not sure if the exact rules individually are applying. That they're trying to. It's a little bit broad. Is that true, Joel?
Yeah. That's going to be part of a procedural due process argument. There's also going to be a substantive due process argument as to, the degree of deprivation of rights and things like that, and those factors are laid out in Mathews v. Eldridge. It's kind of a foundational substantive due process case. As far as where he gets the authority to determine what businesses are essential or not, I know that they did borrow through his order. They borrowed some of the definitions for essential businesses from the federal definition of essential businesses, and they're looking through historic case law as far as authority to protect the public as a whole. There's almost an inherent power there that was addressed in some very early on cases, including a case in I believe it was 1824, a case of Gibbons v. Ogden, in which it was a navigable waters case, but the Supreme Court laid out that the state does have the ability to protect its citizens and the health and welfare of their state and their cities through powers like quarantine. And it's a very early recognized power that goes back for a really long way. Now this field is currently occupied by the states, but in the early 1900s, it was also discussed by Congress their ability to quarantine and isolate using the commerce power, and ultimately they decided that it was, but they wouldn't use it. Taking language from a case called Morgan Steamship versus Board of Health, they said that if the Congress decides to delegate the authority of a quarantine or an isolation to manage the health and welfare of a city or state, if they delegate that authority to a national board or a local board or other boards, that state laws would be abrogated in that event, meaning that that authority, that delegation of authority, would overrule a state law.
Wow, that's really interesting. So are you saying, and Lauren, I want to get back to you, are you saying federal laws supersede local and state laws, Joel?
That's an intrinsic part of the Constitution that's the supreme law of the land.
What about states' rights, and how do those differ?
Well, states' rights have an important role to play, especially when they're given the authority, such as in a quarantine or isolation situation like this, where the federal government hasn't chosen to take it up and hasn't chosen to occupy that field of law. But if a state law comes in conflict with a federal law preempts the state law. There are a few different ways to preempt the state.
Okay, so the federal law preempts. If it's conflict, the federal law will preempt it. So Lauren, did that answer your question?
It does, but I have one follow up if I have
please,
time.
Please, yeah, we have time.
If a business that has been deemed non-essential chooses to open up and then people choose to go and patronize that business, what is the local government's recourse there? And would something like a ticket or an arrest hold up in court?
Great question, Lauren. And I have an example of that. Joel, I want to hear your answer.
Well, absolutely, you could get ticketed, you could get arrested. So we see under the code, a violation of these orders is a misdemeanor. A
misdemeanor of what, though? I've always wondered that. What are you doing wrong? Misdemeanor of what?
Well, it'd be a violation of the order would be the misdemeanor.
Okay, got it. Okay, fair enough. Go on. And then how's it hold up in court?
Well, obviously your first step would be hire an attorney so that he can look at the procedural due process and substantive due process issues and make these arguments on your behalf. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this. If you're a business that wants to open up and wants to have your business continue, you can file a lawsuit. You can request a TRO, which is a temporary restraining order, to try to keep these orders from applying to your business specifically. There was a case of a Kentucky church that wanted to hold a drive-up service, and they were told they couldn't, even though the people were going to stay in their cars. A preacher was going to preach from the stage, and nobody's really going to be interacting with people, and they just settled that, I believe, and in that settlement agreement they agreed to let them have it, but there were some conditions like the cars had to stay 6 feet away from each other. You can only be in the car with people of your own household. But there's certainly recourse. What we saw with I believe it was an abortion clinic in Ohio, we saw the Attorney General send cease and desist letters to begin with that. And I don't know exactly what the government would do or will do. I just know that you run a very high risk if you open up your business in violation of a law or an order. You run the risk of being liable for anybody who might get sick through that business. So if someone comes into your business, gets sick from it, or even a lot of people get sick, they can file a lawsuit against you and apply a principle called negligence per se, because you're you're violating a statute, you're violating an order that automatically establishes liability.
Lauren, does that
a lot of people,
Joel was telling me that the other day that, I'm not saying people are needing to eat. I know single parents, single moms, single dads that are trying to support their families or just a single income or whatever, and they can't work and they want to go back to work. And I never thought about it that way, but you could be liable if somebody does get sick. Now, we don't know how bad COVID-19 is, and I'm not saying it's not bad, by the way, but that your business could be liable, and that's an issue you have to take up. And one thing Joel said offline is your insurance would never cover that because you basically broken an order. How'd you say that, Joel?
Are you sure it probably wouldn't cover it because you're engaging in illegal activity?
Exactly. So interesting, Lauren. What do you think of that, Lauren? Does that answer your question?
It seems very concerning to me. Just I absolutely understand the legal implications of that, but I worry that there's a political element with some of these local authorities closing down businesses and choosing what businesses are and are not essential. Yeah. I do worry that there is sort of a politics element to that, and I know that that's the case with all of law, and that our ability to address that is through things like elections. But when it makes the difference between a business being able to stay in business after this and having to shutter, it seems like in effect, if it were politically motivated, it would succeed regardless of whether or not it was legal. Does that make sense?
And certainly that makes sense. And I completely agree with you. I don't know under what concept they made liquor stores essential and churches not.
Liquor stores provide usually state revenue for taxes. I just wonder if that's the political element that Lauren's talking about. I mean, Lauren, I totally agree.
Very well, maybe.
That the government is picking winners and losers here. Why is it that the single mom who happens to be a hairstylist and makes an okay living is not essential, and it is illegal for her to cut hair in her home now, and to even make money and support her family? Why is that not essential? I don't understand that. I just don't. But I'm just going to give you crazy examples. To me, being a scientist and knowing about contamination and whatnot, the grocery stores, they are doing crazy things. Okay, like they're putting plastic over the credit card machines. What? So my contaminated fingers contaminate it, and then the next person contaminates it after that. You're doing nothing. But I get it. We have to have food. But
that's what I was wondering, like antimicrobial plastic.
Oh, I don't care if it's antimicrobial or not. They haven't done tests on that, and they're not changing it after every single interaction, and they're not cleaning it after every single interaction. I just think that these are, Lauren, my concerns are your concerns. These are draconian measures that the government, there's a political element here, possibly. We may or may not, in our generations, in our lifetime, know about it. But the truth will come out. What I love about our country, that you said this, Lauren, is that we have elections. And I've talked to Joel about this the last couple of days. What I like is, we've had this mother that was arrested for taking her child in a park, and they were playing in this park locally in Idaho. And she was arrested because the park was off limits. So she was trespassing. I get that. Okay. But, I like that that's all that happened to her. I'm not saying it wasn't horrible and arrested. In other countries, she could have been thrown in jail and maybe even died or been killed. We have, I've traveled the world, and what I love about our country is we have, in my opinion, the best rule of law in any country. Am I scared that our rights are being taken away? You bet I am. And I see some Facebook comments, and we'll talk about that. What can we do? What is our call to action? It's not just elections, although that is so inherent to our democratic republic. We're not a democracy. We're a democratic republic. Okay. Democracies turn into anarchies very quickly. Okay. But we're a democratic republic with laws. And so, those things scare me. But at the same time, I think that we will, towards the end of the show, we'll talk more about a call to action. There are some things that can be done, Lauren. And so thank you for your call. Did you get everything answered?
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys doing this. I wanted to say, I think conversations like this are part of the call to action, and they're part of what's going to help us hang on to some of these rights that we're fearful of losing now. So I appreciate you guys doing this.
Well, thank you. We really do want to be that voice of America, and especially that voice of rural America, where we're very different than New York City or Seattle or San Francisco, which may or may not be per capita worse off than us. We just don't really know all that data right now. But here's the fact that we do know locally. Listen, we're in a fairly small county. We're in rural Idaho, but our economy, we know of 3 cases of COVID-19 in our county. 3. Okay. Now listen to what's happened. This is the data that I'm reading. Okay. From a pretty reputable source, because these people know what they're talking about. 3,000 jobs lost and at least a $22 million hit to the economy. I guarantee you, I was driving around with a friend the other day, and we were just doing some grocery shopping, whatever, and we were going by businesses, and we were thinking, some of these aren't going to be in business in a month. Well, we already know some aren't opening up, and those things scare me, because in a way the government has self-inflicted that upon them, and they're choosing winners and losers. And so I'm concerned about all these things. I'm concerned about the virus. I'm concerned about health, draconian measures, authoritarian government, and also concerned about business. Okay, that's how we survive. So you're going to stay tuned. Keep watching, Lauren, because you're going to hear more about what we can do, and it's not just elections. So stay tuned, Lauren. Thank you very much for your call. And we are going to take more callers. Call in if you have more questions. Call in at 877-995-2111, and we will take your call live. Thanks, Lauren. And if you have any more questions, send them on Facebook. Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. Those were great answers, Joel. And I'm getting a lot of, we'll try to get to them. By the way, Joel, you are educating people. You're giving people a voice. So what is so cool about this, and I'm so excited to have you on the show, and just your passion for the Constitution and for law and justice. You can tell that's about you, and that's important to me, is that you're giving people a voice. And one thing that you talked about. So I want to get to this. There's a local case somewhere in Idaho. I don't remember exactly where it was, but a business opened, right? Mm-hmm. And it was in a direct violation of the governor's orders. Okay. And the business opened. And so I believe the state said something like, let's call the feds and see what they say. So the feds said, oh, state, take care of it. And then the state said, oh, we'll let the local municipality take care of it. The local city or the local county, whatever it was. And the local city said, well, we're not going to do anything about it. And so I think a lot of, because they don't know if there's, I don't know the term for it, is there's a jurisdiction to do anything about it. So basically what you were talking about is that feds have given states powers, and then the states can give local municipalities powers, but it sounds like they're passing the buck. Can you explain on why that might be? Is it because they think that,
I think we're in a, nationally and internationally, I think everyone's in a really, really hard spot. There have been plans put in place to deal with different epidemics and things like that, but this situation has never really hasn't happened before. Hasn't happened since we had our 1918 influenza outbreaks, but we didn't have the information that we have now. And I mean, even before that, I guess we had yellow fever, but this situation, especially with the information we can get from other countries and the information we can get from state to state and how that information is disseminated, there is a huge advantage and a huge disadvantage to all that information, and nobody knows quite what to do with it. And I think
you bring up a good point. Yeah.
I think
Joel, we call that in my world. So I'm an analytical chemist. I own an analytical testing laboratory. And so we deal with analytical tests, and including things like, for example, testing for COVID-19. That's an example. I'm not saying we do COVID-19 testing. I'm just saying that that's an example, is that we sometimes get paralysis through analysis. And what do I mean by that? Okay. What I mean by that is we can collect so much data sometimes, we don't know what to do with it. We're paralyzed. And I think I'm going to have a guest on my show. It's actually my brother. He's one of the first people. He owns a pharmacy in Central Washington. His pharmacy today, right now, actually, is doing COVID-19 testing. One of the first ones in the county, in the area, in the state, and they're full all day just testing. Okay, we were talking about testing. And we think about this, and why does this relate to the law? Because we're talking about COVID-19 and our rights being taken away. And in theory, the government should collect lots of data here to make sure before they possibly take our rights away, they know what they're doing scientifically, because they all say it's driven by the data, right? I have a question for you all, and we'll be talking about it Monday on the show. I'll give you more details later with my brother. He's going to be on. Why are we testing? There's no cure for it. There's no treatment for it. Why are we testing? We test in clinical labs. We test biomarkers. We test clinical diagnostics. So then we can make a health decision on what to do with this person and how to treat them. If you have high cholesterol, you might be able to change your diet. You might be able to, for example, go on some kind of statin drug, something like that. If you have possibly high blood glucose, you can do something, right? What are you going to do if you have COVID-19? Nothing. There's no treatment right now. So are they going to just isolate you? Well, it's too late because you've already contaminated the people for the last 2 weeks. So,
right. Yeah, I mean, there are obviously differences in your behaviors you can make. Like, you're not going to go see your aging parents if you know that you have the disease, because they're higher risk for.
Mark, we got another caller. Mark from Idaho. Another caller. So we're going to wrap this up. Stay on hold, Mark. We have you on the line. Joel, I agree with you. You're not going to go visit your aging parents if you have the disease. I understand that, but the timing of the test is critical. And I guarantee you, just like timing the stock market, timing a test of when you're infected and when you're actually contagious is a disaster that would never work. That would rarely work scientifically. So, because what some people are saying is we have to stay quarantined until there's a vaccine. Okay, 12 to 18 months, okay, and shut down the economy for that long. There are government leaders that are saying that. That scares me, and I'll tell you why. We don't know if a vaccine is going to work. There's not one flu vaccine that works. Not one that works for is this going to have many different mutations, and the COVID-19 is going to be different every single year, so there's different vaccine every year? Is this going to be a seasonal thing where we have to actually have these lockdowns and quarantines every single year? I don't know. But speaking as a scientist, the data is just not there yet.
It could be that we get this seasonally, and we get many waves of it, just like we did with the Spanish flu, and it may mutate. But some of the things that we know about strains like the Spanish flu is your body will adapt. Your body will, if you get it once. I mean, they're talking about how it can reactivate in your body, or you can get it again. And again, we've got a wide range of information, and I'm really happy that you said earlier that I was helping educate people, because I think that's the best combat to all of this different information is to educate yourself and to try to make sure you understand why you feel the way that you feel, or what makes this legal, or why your business should be open or why it shouldn't be open. And I think in the middle of all that, there are a lot of people that are really getting hurt by this, economically, physically. And again, I'm not a doctor or an economist, but I do think that education is probably the best way to handle this kind of thing.
It is. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate your calm in the storm as well. I get very passionate about these things just because, it scares me. I have fear just like everybody else. I have fear that our rights are being taken away, that our economy is being affected, that my business is being affected, my children's generation will be affected, all those things. And so thank you. So we have another caller, Mark from Idaho. Mark, you are live. You're on the air with Joel. What's your question for Joel? Oh, 1 second. Okay, Mark, we will get you back. Let's see. Mark, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. We can hear you. So, Mark, what's your question for Joel?
Gotcha.
Okay, I just have a brief break in work, so I'm going to fire this off to you guys and let you discuss it, but I'm going to hop off afterwards.
Sounds great. Thank you, Mark.
My question is regarding war power authorities. So I know early in this crisis, some war power authorities were at least discussed. Were discussed being used. I'm not sure whether they were to coerce businesses to produce, in this case, ventilators. Of course, it could be other things, and that I can kind of see the utility of that in this situation. However, and I don't know if you caught this in the Bernie Sanders concession speech that he was having with Biden. Biden talked about using war power authority to basically force the Green New Deal into effect. So my question is, what are the criteria used to actually give war power authorities, and what are the limits to those powers?
So, Joel, can you just kind of follow that up? Great. That is a great question, Mark. We will answer it offline. Who gives the authority for war power authorities, and what does that all entail? Joel, can you explain, maybe to some callers that don't know what that is what those authorities are and what that, I guess, measures are and how they've worked in the past? Let's explain that.
Well, Congress has the ability to declare war, and I don't know who we'd be declaring war against. And we're not. It's interesting because a lot of the earlier cases, I think you can probably draw a conclusion that a lot of the earlier public health cases are pretty similar to national security cases. But if I recall, Biden and Bernie Sanders both in a debate prior to that said they would try to call up the National Guard in order to help enforce these orders. And from my understanding is they do have the ability to do that. What that looks like, I mean, on a state level, they can. What that looks like, I don't know. I don't know if we're talking about the National Guard showing up at somebody's business and hauling them out of there and throwing them in jail, or being used as a police force, or simply as what we've seen them used in other states, such as setting up impromptu hospitals and aiding in the testing efforts and things like that.
And I want to speak logistically and scientifically a little bit about that, Joel, as well, the war powers. And I agree, if you're going to have some kind of a standing army or the National Guard being a police force or something that's scary, then there's the other parts of the War Powers Act, like Mark was talking about, where the president can give executive orders to like General Electric or GM or Ford to say, hey, make these products. So obviously I love the free market and I love the innovation in our society. I love that in the United States. It's the best in the world by far. We have the most productivity per capita in any other country. And I love that. And I hope that continues, in the most innovation as well. Now, what I don't like about those war powers is I can't remember the company that was told to make 100,000 ventilators or something. Those ventilators are going to collect dust or probably be thrown away now. It was too late. And I don't think we ever really needed all those ventilators. It's just the data that we had. People just, in my opinion, Joel, they just operated in fear. Most of our leaders operated in fear. Now, there's 8 states in the Midwest. I can't even name them all. Iowa, Wyoming, I think both of the Dakotas. There's a couple more. I can't remember. There's 7 or 8 that never had any shutdowns, never had any quarantines. Per capita, they are just as good off as any other state that's had a shutdown or a quarantine. A lot of leaders, they acted in fear. And
well, again, you got a lot of stuff that comes out about the states, like when they're not testing enough, things like that. I think we do have to be careful with the information that we get, especially with the statistics that we get. And again, this isn't something anybody's dealt with before. It was delegated to the states to handle it how they're going to handle it, and then with the federal government, saying, well, you can't open up until I say so. I think that has made the states really double down, saying, no, we are in charge of this. Which, for good and for bad, the states are going to be able to handle this on a smaller government level, which personally I'm actually in favor of. I enjoy a smaller government than a larger government, being from Idaho and having particular interests here. As far as seizing industry, we saw something similar to that happen in case with President Truman and Youngstown Steel, and the Supreme Court actually didn't let it happen. They determined that there was no real state of emergency. It was the event of there was a fear that there wasn't going to be enough steel, and that the workers were going on strike, and he tried to seize the steel mills. And the Supreme Court said, well, there's plenty of steel, we're fine. So there was no real state of emergency, and I think
That's interesting. And that was that the Warren Court too?
I don't remember.
Wow, that's a very interesting case. So it does get shot down sometimes. It's not just like a president can say, "Here's my executive power. Here's what I'm going to do." The Supreme Court can get involved, and they will.
It does, but when it does come to quarantine and isolation, there's not a lot of limitations in a state of actual emergency, which has been declared. I mean, like, we are in a state of emergency. Let's not get that wrong. Like, you know, if we're not, please correct me. But from what I understand, we are in an established state of emergency, and I don't know that it's going to get any better. I don't know what the future holds, and I know that there is damage to our economy and there's damage to individuals. There is, but there's, just like relating this to national security law, public health. There's an idea that you are promoting the general welfare over the individual's welfare, and a state has the power to do that.
I understand. That's very interesting. So as we're wrapping up, we have a few more minutes. I want to definitely get to a call to action and discuss that. And we've already kind of talked a little bit about it, what can be done. But before we do that, I want you to say a little bit about Attorney General Barr. So this is not a direct quote, but everybody can go look it up. Basically, there's some states that are talking that they're going to do this for months, that they're going to quarantine for months more, even though they've seen the terms are flattening the curve and the cases are going down for COVID-19, all that. And then the people are saying, oh, well, that's taking away my rights. And what Attorney General Barr is saying is he will side with the people against the states on that. What limit do you see? The federal government kind of ordered this, Joel. They kind of talked about quarantines or told the states to. Now the states, if they get too onerous, Attorney General Barr is going to say, okay, we're going to side with the people. I mean, this is so confusing. How would that work?
You know, I talked a little bit earlier about the Interstate Commerce Clause, and there's going to be a lot of governmental powers federal governmental powers that are brought in through something like that, such as the ability to regulate interstate commerce. If a state, take California for instance, you know, we've got Los Angeles as one of the biggest economies in our country. You know, if they decide to stay shut down, that's obviously going to interfere with interstate commerce. There's also an aggregation principle that you can apply, even if that's not enough to significantly affect interstate commerce. There's an aggregation principle. You can say, well, if all the states do this, then it would significantly affect interstate commerce, and that would interfere with the federal government's, you know, absolutely granted power by the Constitution. It's a very well established power. It's a very broad power that's been used to I mean, I believe it was even the underlying power of outlawing child pornography. So you see these kinds of things being used as, some would say, overreaching or overbroad powers, but certainly that's going to be implicated by states refusing to open up, and a state can't regulate interstate commerce. That's a federal power.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and the feds kind of get to decide what interstate commerce is, as we've known in the past, correct?
Yes. I mean, we have some case law on what they can regulate, on what specifically they can regulate. They can regulate a person or thing that's in interstate commerce. They can regulate a channel of interstate commerce, or they can regulate anything that significantly affects interstate commerce. And they're allowed to apply that aggregation principle through a case called Wickard v. Fillmore, which is an old case, but we also have other interesting powers that I think are implicated. There's something called the Dormant Commerce Clause, which doesn't allow another state to to be prejudiced against a separate state. So, you know, you can't treat people in New Jersey, can't treat New Jersey people better than New York people. But I think in the time of quarantine and isolation, especially in the state of an emergency, I think those powers are going to be implicated, and there are going to be a lot of other issues that might come up from this.
Interesting. Well, that's a great way. So before we talk about a call to action, Joel, one of the things on my podcast where we have the theme of never being outworked is I like to talk about, and I can think of one of your examples. Obviously, you and I have had lots of conversations that really inspired me, but about your never be outworked, your no excuses attitude and your mindset where you wanted to succeed at something. And I guess you could look at it externally as you failed yourself, but it ended up being, you ended up being successful because of it no matter what. And then we'll talk about call to action. But what would your example for yourself be? Where is there an example? I've got one in my head for you, by the way, that I'm going to talk about anyway. And which is inspiring to me. So is there an example for you?
Something where I failed at something and it worked out.
Where you think you failed. I don't even like to use the term failure because I know the type of person you are. You're going to get back up. You only fail if you don't get back up. And so, but somebody might look at it and say, oh, well, they didn't win the state championship, so they failed, or whatever it would be, right? Whereas you would look at that and it could drive you to do something else and succeed in another area. So do you have an example?
Oh, certainly. I wrestled all my life, and I wasn't the best wrestler in the country, you know, and there's always those levels of achievement you can look at. And one level of achievement that I always set my heart on was I wanted to be an All-American when I was in high school. I just barely missed it last.
So All-American, for you viewers that don't know, an All-American means you're going to be top 8 in the country at your style and your weight of wrestling and your age group. And I mean, it's a truly an amazing feat. Okay. So go on, Joel.
And I mean, you know, and I've learned a lot of really important lessons since then that I wish I'd had in my head at the time, but I really wanted that top 8 status, and I just needed to win one of my next 2 matches, and I lost them both by a point. And I was so upset with myself, and you know, I felt like it closed a lot of doors to me, and I really failed myself as a high school kid trying to do that. But it really, really worked out in my benefit. I ended up going to a Division III school and wrestling out there, and I made friends with one of my best friends still to this day, Rockley Vallejo, and that relationship and that friendship there, I can't undervalue that. That's been it's been a staple in my life since then, and it absolutely worked out in my benefit, and I can't really complain about the steps and the failures that I had in my life because it brought me to where I am now. So,
gosh, I love that mindset. No regrets, just learning opportunities. That's awesome. So for you viewers that are still listening, there's a lot of you online. This has been a great show. I will get to all your comments as possible. I see so many of them, and a lot of them were, what's the call to action? What can we do? Now, we talked about elections, okay? Elections are a good way to do that. Make sure you vet your officials before you elect them and see how they feel about these rights and what camp they're in, and then you make your appropriate vote, right? What is another call to action that we've kind of talked about, Joel, that is possible in the law, whereas me as an individual, correct me if I'm wrong, if I don't like what the governor is making me do, or the mayor, or even a sergeant in the police force, is this correct? I can take that to litigation to court and say, I don't agree with this, correct?
It's not that simple. You have to meet a couple of elements. You have to have standing in order to do that. And standing means that you have to have an injury in fact to yourself. So it has to have hurt you in some way. These orders have to have impacted you personally.
So let's just start with businesses. People, obviously their businesses have been hurt and they've been negatively impacted by some of the things the governors or local authorities or federal authorities have done. What can those people do? We're talking to, for example, the single mom here who does hair or is working a job that is now determined non-essential. What can they do? What's recourse for them?
Well, you can go to court and you can ask for a temporary restraining order that keeps these orders from applying to you. Now, your first step in that is to call an attorney. That's kind of what we're here for. If you can't afford that, there are a lot of different special interest groups in the country that even look for people that have standing to challenge these types of orders. You know, I don't want to speak for any of them and say that they automatically take up a case like this, or this is part of their ideology. But I know of places like the Pacific Legal Foundation, things like that are special interest groups that help out people that don't like the regulatory state, don't like the administrative state. But there's also, you can band together with other people. There are other people that have also been injured by this kind of thing, and you're going to have some grounds, such as a due process argument, because you've been denied your rights, not according to the procedures that they've prescribed for themselves, or you can even say that procedure wasn't adequate. But those are your first steps. That's how you can really fight back, and you'll probably end up with some type of a compromise. There is a public interest in this isolation and the quarantine, that we want to keep our state healthy. But you'll probably end up getting something like that Kentucky church did. You'll get some kind of I shouldn't say probably, but you can get an agreement that says, you can open up your business in this way under these conditions, because certainly no one in the government wants the quarantine and the isolation that's meant to protect the health of the public to be thrown out. I think there are a lot of ideologies and a lot of things that are implicated here, and there are injuries on both sides of this. Whatever camp you're in, if you're in the camp of COVID-19 is the most serious illness to have hit for various reasons, its communicability, all that kind of stuff. If you're in that camp, or if you've have a loved one pass away because of it, you've seen how horrible it can be, you're going to be very, very strong on one side. And then again, if you're watching a loved one that's struggled to build a business and to make a life for themselves, and kind of got to that point against all odds to really branch out on their own, and you're watching that person struggle or fail through their business, it's going to hit home for you too. I think an important thing to promote in this type of time of crisis is reasonability, being reasonable with each other, and remembering that we're not alone, and we're not the only ones hurt by this in one way or another. And I would really stress that kind of stuff, and not being too angry without the education.
I like that. That is a great bullet point, where not being too angry without the education, and you can see both sides of this, and there are rights, there are things you can do. And I'm just thankful we live in a free country, so to speak, where at least we have free elections as much as possible, and that we can do that freely. And Joel, you have been an amazing guest. You ought to see the comments. They are amazing. I'm watching them come up live. My phone is blowing up. The Facebook comments are blowing up. This is amazing. So Joel, you've been just great. Thank you very, very much. You've really put a lot of reasonability into this, and there are some things we can do. There is a call to action. And so thank you, Joel, and I am sure we will talk soon. So we will have another show on Monday. I will have my brother on about antibody testing for COVID-19, where they'll have some results of how that went. They're doing that today. And stay tuned on my Instagram, on my LinkedIn, and on my Facebook for live updates of all of our previous recorded shows. Those are condensed and edited, and I'm ready to take those live as well and make them for your streaming enjoyment. So thanks again to all you viewers. Thanks, Joel. And thanks to all you callers. This has been great. Thanks for making this an awesome show. It's going to get better and better, where we're always going to be the voice of science, the voice of business, and the voice of rural America. And remember, never be outworked. See you soon.